in my impression, that means that if you had to, you could probably recreate your 30s in another decade, but you cannot recreate your 20s. Life is so different for a human being when you do not have a plan B. No better way to step into this episode than by sharing with you where it's actually going. When we started Your Story, Your Medicine, I honestly didn't know exactly what it would become. We've had some beautiful conversation, heard some incredible stories, and I've been fortunate to sit across from people who are willing to share parts of themselves that aren't always easy to talk about. And I want to start by saying thank you, especially to all of the women who have shared their stories with us so far. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, your wisdom, and for trusting us with your stories. These conversations have been an important part of this podcast, and I'm genuinely grateful for every one of you. But something has been becoming increasingly clear to me. The work I'm doing, the conversations I'm having, and the community that is growing around me is increasingly centered around men. Men's mental health, men's emotional lives, the relationships, identity, purpose, fatherhood, intimacy, pressure, success, and loneliness. The things that so many men experience internally, but don't always have a place to talk about it openly. So, from this episode onwards, Your Story, Your Medicine is becoming a podcast focused specifically on men. And today's episode feels like the right place to begin, because for the first time, you're actually going to hear my story in this way. My partner is sitting across from me, asking me the questions about my childhood, the things I've struggled with, the patterns I've carried, the mistakes I've made, and ultimately what brought me to the work I'm doing today. And I think it's important that before I ask other men to tell their stories, I tell you more of mine. Because this isn't a podcast about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to be honest. And over the coming episodes, I'm going to be sitting down with men from all walks of life and creating a space for conversations that perhaps we haven't been having enough of. Real conversations and what it means to be a man today. About all the things we carry, the things we hide, the relationships we're trying to navigate, the fathers some are trying to become, the pressure we put on ourselves, the parts of ourselves we've lost along the way, and what happens when we finally become willing to look within. So if you're a man listening to this, I hope this becomes a place where you feel seen. And if you're someone who loves a man, supports a man, works alongside men, raises boys, or simply wants to understand the men in your life better, I hope there's something here for you too. This is the next chapter of Your Story, Your Medicine, and I'm really glad you're here for it.
All right, Taylor, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So let's bring it back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Melbourne, southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, in a suburb called Springvale. And then that was pretty much up until the end of primary school. And then we moved to a spot out called Willis Hill.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So did you grow up with any siblings?
I did, older sister. She's 15 months older than me. So we were very close growing up. We spent a lot of time together. And I guess probably around 12, 13, I started kind of just venturing out around the neighborhood, skated when I started skating in year 7. And then that was kind of me. High school, right? You kind of focus on your own stuff, doing your own thing. So I was far more extroverted than my sister. She was more introverted in a way, had a nice, tight, close friends. But I was always off down the street, talking to people, introducing myself, seeing what was going on. So
Beautiful. How was that experience? What's like the type of memory that you have in that time?
Yeah, the first part of my childhood was quite amazing, really. I remember it was now being an adult, I look back and I totally can imagine my parents now, getting their first home, having a young family. There was always a lot of music in the house. It was very influential in that sense. I remember like making pasta in the kitchen and running around with my sister, and there was renovations, and my dad built a cubby house out of like old speakers, and it was like 3 stories with a rope ladder, and we had a big backyard with rabbits and lemon tree, and like riding around in little pushies and stuff, and huge veggie garden. I remember grabbing with like fresh corn, and my mum would have boiled some water, and my dad would go out in the garden, and he would like crack the corn off the tree and then run, like literally run inside and like straight into the water, and like so as fresh as they could be. And we had beans and all kinds of greens in the garden bed. So it's very hands on. It was very fun, very hands on. There was still like a lot of structure, there was a lot of discipline, but it was a very hands on early childhood for sure. And my dad was a scientist, so he was all about, you know, encouraging us to ask like why and what's that and things like that. We had microscopes, and so we'd put things under the microscopes and we'd like find little things, and I'd always be asking questions, why is this and why is that? And so he was very encouraging in that sense. It was like, he also enjoyed the why, and he was a very, very intelligent man, so he shared a lot of that knowledge and wisdom as well, so which is really cool.
Beautiful. Would you say that curiosity has kind of found its way throughout your whole life then? Like even when you were like teenager, skater boy and everything, were you still very curious and asking questions?
For sure, yeah. I was always, growing up with that encouragement to ask questions, I was always leaning into that. I was also very curious about the world in general, and I've always been curious about self, really. I remember having a lot of awareness for a very young person, awareness of what the world around me and what was happening. And so I'd often ask into it. I mean, I would look back and I was kind of fearless in that way of just wanting to know and wanting to understand. And it's not like I wouldn't consider myself, an intellectual bookworm or anything like that, but I like tangibility, and I like touching things and being out there and experiencing things and experiencing for myself. Is one of my highest values, is just life and experiences. So if I could ask somebody, what's this, or how does this work, or how do you get to this point, and how did that work for you, kind of thing, then I was there, and I was in and around all that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So we were at your skater years and everything, and from then on, what came into your life?
Yeah, well, I guess so. I went to a private school in year 7, just for year 7. And my sister, she went for 2 years and I went for 1 year. And then basically one day my parents sat us down and were just like, look, due to financial circumstances, we can't really continue to afford to send you to this school. They did say if we really wanted to stay, they would do anything they could to make that happen. But both my sister and I could tell that there was already a lot of stress in and around that. And so we both agreed and said, to support the family, it's okay, we'll go to a public school. And so that was really a really big shift for a lot of reasons, because not just physically moving schools and changing environments and making new friends, but it was kind of a shift for my dad as well. At this stage, he was working, but he was no longer in like the medical scientific field. He left that behind, and he was kind of just working warehouse jobs and bits and pieces. And I could tell that was putting a lot of stress on him, and his kind of processings were becoming and starting to be a bit unhealthy. So there was really a lot going on for everybody at that time. And by this stage, we'd moved house, and so it was my parents' kind of dream home, which is amazing for them. And the area was beautiful, like I said, Willis Hills. So there's hills everywhere, great to skate, beautiful environment, safe neighborhood. But the home life just kind of progressively got more and more uncomfortable and unstable, basically. And so, you know, then you navigate going to a new school, and that has what it has with the systems of that. But then I was always pretty good. I could adapt very quickly, made friends. But then, as I said, my father then lost his job or got made redundant and started drinking a lot more and things like this. So, yeah, I used to just, already having a lot of natural curiosity. That was also to spend time outside the house was also already motivated by what was happening inside the house.
In retrospect, it's always very easy to tell or talk about these decisions, small decisions that were being made, right? I mean, to be asked at such an age, like, oh, do you want to continue in private school or are you okay with public school, seems to be such a big decision in the end for a kid, right? And then you and your sister very nobly making that decision. Was there any point in time where there was a little regret?
I think it was less regret, and it was more, there was clear differences of going to a private school and a public school.
How was that, the difference?
Well, I think my education suffered for sure. But there's always two sides to every coin. So what I lost in education, I gained in social skills, because the dichotomy of the public school that I went to, it was very diverse, very culturally diverse. So I was basically friends with kids from all around the world, but who'd grown up in Australia. And to me, that was amazing. Like I said, I adapted very quickly and well, but it was very clear that the path of the private school is very programmed to be like, you know, they're trying to form and mold the next CEOs. Whereas at a public school, you got parents who don't even pay the school fees and expect the teachers to do a great job educating their children. So the standards are very different, like very, very different. And also too, then the standards of the parents going to, like, with the kids at the school, and then the kids' values and standards within themselves at the school. So yeah, it was a stark contrast, but nothing was regretted, because I think that we made the decision as a family, and that was more important. And my parents were always very transparent with a lot of things. Even, you know, my mum was a nurse all her working life. I said my dad was a scientist. So like any question we had about human life, the body, sex, anything like that, it was very open. It was very shared, and there was nothing was off the table. Like if you want to talk about anything, it was always there. It was always safe in that regard. So, but it's just kind of one of those things. It just feels like your duty. You know, you're a kid, you don't know anything else, and I'm glad, because, you know, life has many different twists and turns, but I also believe that everything happens for a reason too. So
Beautiful. So you said you were spending more time outside in the end than at home, because home life was unstable and you didn't feel that it would be safe. So how did that affect you later on, or how did that go throughout the next years?
Yeah, well, I guess I didn't really know how it was affecting me until later, because it was so tumultuous that I felt like I was more often than not in this survival kind of mode. I really didn't know what I was walking into every day, and it's amazing how much you can pick up from sounds, from body language, from what has been done, what hasn't been done. You know, you become like this. I became like this private detective, you know, and ultimately I became very hypervigilant and on edge to protect my emotional state. Because if I knew more about the situation and what was happening, then I could navigate it better, which means I could avoid certain catastrophes that were bound to happen. You know, so it's almost like I didn't have to grow up too quick in terms of responsibility, but I grew up very quick in terms of awareness and having to learn quickly what was happening around me. And if I didn't, then, you kind of paid the price.
Would you say that awareness has also carried you through social life, or was that just at home?
Yeah, definitely. That carried through. I mean, it's carried through into my whole life, really. Like, as I mentioned, younger, I was always naturally more attuned to what was happening around me. But then when you put that into a survival setting, it's powerful what you can learn and what you can adapt. But then I then kind of, that translated into people pleasing. So then I was able to kind of see and navigate a social setting or a conversation, hear, watch, and listen, and then go, okay, well, this is what, and I could apply what I felt was right at the time to make everybody comfortable, because I could, as I'm quite intuitive emotionally, and I have a lot of empathy, so I feel a lot more. So then in that same setting, it's just like, oh, well, if I do this or say this, then we're all going to feel great. So I would do that.
So you're probably towards high school right now, navigating home life, social life, and then what was the next step?
Yeah, so I finished high school. I wasn't I wasn't going to, but my mum was very encouraging. She would wanted me to do that. So I did that, and then I was already accepted into like a carpentry pre-apprenticeship. And yeah, the end of high school was fun. It was just all about socializing and spending time with friends. That finished up, went into the pre-apprenticeship, which was at like a TAFE college, and then did that for 3 months. And then I was working as an apprentice carpenter. Then I was still living at home, but I was just out every weekend with my friends and partying and doing all that. As I said, trying not to spend, any more time than I had to at home, kind of thing.
And so after the apprenticeship, that would be 2 years?
Well, I left a year and a half in. So I got a call one day from a friend who was living up in Queensland, and he just asked me what I was doing, and I said I'm nailing on skirting in a cupboard. And he was like, "No, what are you doing with your life?" kind of thing. And I said, "Oh, not much." And coincidentally, at that stage, I was already feeling like it was a little bit monotonous. And I didn't. To be fair, like I didn't even really want to do a carpentry apprenticeship. Like I always, as I said, I love tangibility. I love working my hands and love being creative. But to go from school straight into an apprenticeship, it's a pretty big snap to reality. Like in Melbourne, particularly, like you're waking up at 5 in the dark in the middle of winter to go be on a building site, freezing cold, and like learning a trade and all these sort of things. And I really try to just focus on the fact that how fortunate I was to be getting paid to learn and learn to study, and that was my form of study. But there was definitely a part of me that saw my friends who went to university and thought, oh wow, that would have been amazing. Like I really felt like I would have resonated with that and bits and pieces. But of course, I didn't apply myself for that, and so it was kind of like this trade-off where I was happy enough doing what I was doing, knowing that it was setting me up, or that it was a life skill that would always come in handy. But the kind of realities of it were pretty uncomfortable. It was just like, oh, and you kind of, in an apprenticeship, once you kind of get up over a certain marker and a point in that road, then it actually does become a little bit more enjoyable, because you become more skilled, so you can do more things and ultimately hopefully be more creative or whatever, or just develop those techniques a lot more. But in the beginning, it's like, I mean, you're spending a lot of time cleaning houses and on brooms and doing all the work that an apprentice does, right? So yeah, it was, but as I said, I got about a year and a half in. I was having an amazing time with my friends, but it was Groundhog Day. And so I rang my friend back 5 minutes later and I said, yeah, and I accepted his invitation to move up there. And he'd just gotten out of the surf, and it was sunny, and we were surfing in boardies and all this sort of stuff. So for me, it was everything I wanted. I was very, very fortunate. My family have had like a holiday house or a block of land in our family for like 5 generations. And so I was always going down the coast on Christmas holidays And that's why I learned to surf, and I spent time in the ocean and connecting with nature and everything. So I was like, I had this childhood where it was a suburban life, skating, cruising around with friends. And then on the summer holidays, I'd go down the coast and it would just be beach, ocean, bush, riding my pushy, and so I feel very blessed because I'm very comfortable with both the city and nature. I mean, I will always lean more towards nature, but I love going to cities. I love the energy of cities, things like that. I love tapping into both. Love the art that comes from a city. I love the art that comes from nature. It's just, they're their own worlds. And so I felt like I really wanted to tap more into nature and more importantly, into surfing. So I accepted his invitation, and then I told my closest friends, and nobody really believed me, as I could imagine, because we were all like best friends, all hanging out, having a great time. And then a couple of months went by, leading closer to the date that I was going to leave, and I think it really sunk in for the friends I was with, and it was a big turning point for myself because I'd met a girl. I said the closest of friends. We were partying. I had a taste of this different kind of freedom. I said home life was not enjoyable in those like kind of pre and post years, and so it was kind of like I felt like a bit of a bird, just like flying around, getting a taste of freedom. But I wanted more, and I was just like, and so it was a very, very hard decision to make because everything that felt so comfortable and right at the time was there, but it was kind of like the what if, and I just didn't want to be a person, or even for myself, to look back and regret not going, having this opportunity and just being like, and why not, And so I said goodbye to my friends. It was an amazing summer. Like, went to a bunch of festivals and did all that, and then I like packed my car and said goodbye to my mum, and she was like crying in the driveway, and my friend and I, we took off and we drove up the coast, and the car broke down and had to like stay a night and a half in a small rundown kind of town, and it was already an adventure, and it was already something I was craving. And by the time we made it up to the Sunshine Coast, like landed in the house. I mean, the house was on a street called Oceanic Drive, and the house was on the ocean side, and it was like this perfect rectangle grass patch backyard surrounded by like native Australian scrubby bush. And then there was a private track through the scrub, and then you come out over the dunes and you were like there at the ocean. And so it just completely blew my mind. I was like, wow, you can move from the suburbs of Melbourne to this. And I knew that it was a stepping stone for the rest of my life. Like, I just knew it. And those first 2-3 months were tough because my friends would call me every Saturday night and they'd go, tell me all the things I'm missing out on and tell me how much they missed me and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, I was like 19. I just turned 20, so it was, it's hard. It's hard to say goodbye.
It was a true test.
Yeah, it was the first of many tests. And, but I'd wake up on the Sundays and I'd be fresh and I'd go for a surf in the sun and I'd hang out, and like, it was a whole new life. And it kind of became a bit of a pattern actually, because Melbourne and then Australia became its own teachings and its own beautiful lessons within those. But it became like this point where I would go into Australia, but then I'd go back out to the world, and back to Australia, back out to the world, and kind of things. And this is what happened for quite a while. But I felt different when I was in Australia, and I felt different when I was overseas.
Just to quickly put that into perspective, the distance between Melbourne and in Queensland, that place for everyone that is not from Australia, just to make clear how much of a difference that is from surfing in cold waters to warm waters. Could you explain that a bit?
Yeah, so to drive from where I grew up to where I was then living was like 24 hours driving, and it's 2 states away. So, I mean, even within that intention, I didn't want to be the person to like move out of home, but then still take my laundry to mum's place on a Thursday and have a home cooked meal and then get her to do all those and then come back. Like, I mean, when you have a home cooked meal and your washing done, it is still a luxury. Like, it's still beautiful in that sense. I still value that, but I wanted to be far out. I wanted to really go for it and know that I was leaning in. And it was amazing. Like, I went up there and I was still doing my apprenticeship and I was just exploring the lands. And so it was very healthy kind of lifestyle. And I felt free. Like, I really felt like this was the first time in my life where I was making proper decisions. There was 6 people like living in a house together, all different ages, using those different ages and experiences as guidance and a little bit of wisdom, but then kind of knowing my own and as I said, unlocking so much of that early adolescent navigation and understanding and that kind of bridging into adulthood and doing it on your own terms and then really just reflecting. And I had some close friends move up and we were just like brothers, you know, and it was really cool because it was the first 2 groups of friends, 2 guys in my friends who was like really dedicated to surfing, which is really cool because my Melbourne friends are beautiful, but no one really surfed apart from very small amounts. So everything like lifestyle changed, focuses changed, adventures changed, everything. And it was really beautiful. I love that. So
beautiful. So you were mentioning that you used Australia as like a hub to come back to from your travels. So I imagine there were a lot of travels. So would you want to tell us more about that and maybe your favorite one?
Yeah, I guess so. Strangely enough, everything seemed to kind of work in these 1.5 to 2 year increments. And so I spent a year and a half in Queensland, moved back to Melbourne, finish off the last part of my apprenticeship, and then I moved down the coast like properly. And I lived down there. I was working for a music festival, doing all the carpentry, setting up with my friend, and then met a guy from Peru, a Peruvian dude, Pedro, and he just inspired me. You know, like as I said, I was just so curious, inquisitive. I just asked all these questions, and then he was really cool because he's like, yeah, man, you can stay with my family, da, da, da. And I was like, yeah, that's it. Like, I'm going to South America. And I was meant to meet up with his cousin, but his cousin got done smuggling cocaine. And so that never happened. And then, but I'm like, I'm going anyway, you know? And so I flew into the States. I caught up with my family, who my dad has 3 brothers, and then one of his brothers was living in the States. So my cousins, my auntie, my uncle, and then I flew into Santiago in Chile. And so basically, you know, that was the first time I really adventured overseas and first time I'd really ever been on like a proper plane and anything like that. And that was just 8 months going from Santiago, Chile to Mexico. And, you know, caught a bus all the way up and surfed all the way, met people, I fell in love, did all these things and then sailed from like Colombia to Panama and then went through Central America. And it was just wild. Like, it was just a beautiful, beautiful adventure. Met so many cool people, got to learn a bit of Spanish and, you know, I felt like I was on another planet, you know, and that was, once again, it's like my life, when I look back on it, everything's kind of been its own stepping stone. One thing's led to the next, to the next, to the next. And ironically, it's like the trips on the road and the experiences I had traveling would then open the door for the next path. And then being in the next part of the chapter would then open the door or then put me onto another path, which would then, and it would just, that's how it was. But there was a lot of intention behind that as well. You know, like I didn't want to have much responsibility. And it wasn't because I was completely reckless. It was because I wanted freedom. I wanted to maintain as much personal freedom as I possibly could. And I was grateful that I finished my carpentry apprenticeship and I always had something to kind of fall back on and go to work and had the tools and make money. So basically for 10 years, more like 12 years, I would go overseas for 1 year, 1 to 2 years. I'd come back to Australia, but I had never had any desires to want to go to the suburbs. I never lived in the suburbs again. And I go back to Australia, and I've lived, so mainly down the coast, down on the Great Ocean Road, if I'm in Victoria. Then I lived in Adelaide, and I played in a band over there. I've lived in Queensland. I've lived in Byron Bay, lived there for a couple of years. And then I've lived up in the Kimberley as well. So I've lived in every state on the mainland for more than a year, year and a half. And that was, for me, was what kept the adventure alive. And so then I would be, for example, I got back and I'd live somewhere for a year and a half. The first year, I would kind of just enjoy where I was living. The next 6 months, I would navigate and save and then knuckle down and then collect all the fun tickets and then hit the road again. And so, you know, the next trip after that overseas was Indonesia, America, and then Canada for a snow season. And then the trip after that was the Andaman Islands, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, India, back to India, and Nepal after that. And and then in the early days of those adventures, it was really more about the external. It was about connecting with cultures, it was learning different philosophies, like understanding different values and how that had an impact on people's lives, their belief systems, food, and just trying to get a gauge on how other humans operated and what their intrinsic motivations were. And surfing was a big part of that as well, because surfing is an incredible way to explore to the corners of the earth. You know, I believe it's a really special invitation that a human gets if you're a surfer, because, and I also, in saying that, I really do commend travelers who just travel with no agenda, because I think that's almost somewhat braver. Because when you've got an agenda, such as surfing, I metaphorically at times felt like surfing was a bit of a shield. You know, you could just be like, "Oh, I'm surfing, I'm going here, I'm doing that," and it created so many powerful opportunities. But yeah, just being and just traveling and not having an agenda is actually a lot more difficult than people think. So surfing was always there, it was very prevalent, but I also loved ditching the boards and going inland, going to the jungle, going to do like volcano boarding, going to like trek. Traveling around India with the surfboards is not that great. So cruising around India, like leaving the board somewhere and then cruising around India again, learning that the hard way and then going back with no surfboards. And just, I said, just getting to those corners of the earth and just seeing what's happening was really, really powerful.
You were mentioning that each trip was kind of opening a new door or like the next door, right? So I can imagine that each travel has inspired the next one, right? So of course, this means also a lot of listening to everything that's happening around you and actually being open to take these messages, right? So from all these travels, is there a trip that has especially put an imprint onto you or has influenced you in a specific way?
Yeah, for sure. I would say it's probably the last big trip that I did. And so I was at the time in Australia. I was living in Byron. I lived there for 2 years. I just, like, I'll give you a quick example of like how my life would flow. I was in Adelaide. I just played in a band. The funniest part about it is, like, when I think back to it, there was really maybe a matter of like months in between these adventures. So it was, without a word of a lie, like it was almost as if the adventure was continuous for a decade. And the example of that is when I went to Indonesia, surfed there, cruising around all the islands that I could, surfing. Then from there, went to the States. And then this is 2012. And I met up with a buddy who I'd met in Indonesia and randomly some friends who I'd traveled with in South America. And we all went to Burning Man together. Then after Burning Man, I met up with another friend, an Australian friend who I met in Indonesia, and then met 4 of his buddies who happened to be from Adelaide. And we road tripped down from Reno to New Orleans playing music. And then I ended up back up in Flagstaff, Arizona, and then over to Canada to do a snow season. From there, I went back to Australia, saw the guys were playing a show with the extension of the band in Melbourne, went and saw them and met the rest of the band, reconnected, had this beautiful moment. And then 2 weeks later, I'm driving over to Adelaide and I start living in Adelaide for a year and a half. We're playing shows, doing tours down the East Coast. The band welcomed me in. I was playing with this band, this 12-piece gypsy punk band. And then from there, I went over to did this 6-month trip cruising around Asia with Andaman Islands, bits and pieces, India, Nepal, then moved back to Adelaide for 6 weeks, then went back to Lorne for the summer, worked the summer, bought a van, fitted it out, drove up to Byron, lived up in Byron for 2 years. And that was literally kind of how my life was. And then I was in Byron the 2 years I was there. The first year was fun. It was loose. It was just once again, I didn't want anything really tying me down. And the second year I was 29. I just spent the 29th birthday. I went to the skydiving. What do you call the airstrip? I guess the airstrip out the back of Byron. And I always wanted to skydive. So for my 29th birthday, I took myself skydiving, and it was in the middle of the week, and I actually didn't really end up having anybody to spend it with. So I kind of caught up with some friends later, but things were a little bit awkward at that stage. And to be honest, I was feeling a bit awkward. And that year, my 29th year, was the first time in my life where I started to notice the choices that I was making and the ripple effects it was having, and kind of got stuck back into this, working hard during the week. And then on the weekends, my friends and I would drink and party and have a really fun time. But then it was also draining me a lot, and energetically and emotionally. And then I had a kind of falling out with some friends. And so it just naturally put me in a place where I was spending a lot more time on my own. So I kind of basically went from leaving the house I was living in with my parents, making a very conscious decision that I didn't want anything from the past affecting my life. And I didn't want anybody to feel sorry for me for what I'd experienced. So in that moment, I basically suppressed my childhood. And I kind of put it as I envisioned, in the basement, in a trapdoor, shut the door, locked the key, walked away. And in the same breath, I really wanted to be just positive. I only wanted people to know me as a positive person. And that probably, with, as I was saying, the hypervigilance and everything like that, I actually developed more of a people-pleasing kind of approach to life. But it was really hard to notice because, as I said, connecting with people, listening to people, being curious about people's lives, it's innate. It's a part of who I am. But I would always put the attention on you and not myself. So the moment of this 29th year, when it now came time to me to start kind of looking in, it was very uncomfortable. I didn't know what to do, and the loneliness I was experiencing was very hard to navigate. So I decided I'm going overseas again. And 8 years before that, a friend of mine had shown me a bungee jump that he did in South Africa. And I always knew that I was going to do it. I didn't know when, but I just knew that I was going to do it. And so I was watching my friends around me at the time celebrate their 30th birthdays, but, in kind of traditional fashion, getting wasted and then not really remembering. And I was just oh, no, I want something that's memorable. My 20s have been phenomenal and I want something to really cap it off. And so that was the start of my trip. I flew over to South Africa, randomly had some Melbourne friends there, living there. They were setting up a call center, and basically lived in this penthouse for a month and cruised around, living in Camps Bay and cruised around all through up and down the coast of Cape Town and everything. And on the day of my birthday, went to the bungee jump and got to really recap on my 20s. And it was just powerful, what I'd done, how I'd moved, who I'd met, stories I'd heard. It was just phenomenal, you know, and it really tied into this philosophy that I had early on in that decade, where I naturally observed the people older than me, friends and people I didn't know, entering their 30s and witnessing that everything was naturally slowing down. And so I thought, okay, well, if everything naturally slows down in your 30s, and I can't really distinguish a person in their 30s to their 40s, means that, in my impression, that means that if you had to, you could probably recreate your 30s in another decade, but you cannot recreate your 20s. Like, you cannot do it. And I mean, we kind of laugh when we see like a midlife crisis, you know, and somebody might be wearing the leather pants and doing all this stuff. Like, yeah, I think like when you try and go back in time, it's not as complimentary as if you were to like age well or age gracefully in a different way and through acceptance, I guess. And so I was like, I made that pact to myself early on. I said, I'm traveling till I'm 30, you know, because I saw that the decade of the 20s is just so precious. I was like, man, you can always buy a house. Or I mean, I've worked 2 jobs. I can work for months straight. I've saved so many house deposits, but chose to spend them on traveling, right? As that was my investment for my future that I wanted. And so I was like, well, if you wanted a house, you could just buy it. And if you want to study, you can always go back, and it'd probably be better to study when you're older. And if you want to do anything, it's like you can just do it later on. And so when I was standing there on the edge of that bridge, about to jump off, I was just so proud of myself, because I was like, yeah, you know, you stay true to your word. And it was a decade that, like, there's no way that I could recreate it, nor do I want to. I don't really, I had so much fun, but, you know, spending over 80 hours at the Kuala Lumpur airport over 6 months, those days are behind me. You know, like living out of a bag and next to nothing and just flying by the seat of your pants is phenomenal, but it's also kind of exhausting, you know? So, but I had the robustness, I had the energy, and I had the willingness to do that back then. I didn't bother me in the slightest. So yeah, when I was standing there, I was like, well done, like great investment, you know, like good on you.
You stay true to your words.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was the most important part. I realized I could trust. There was the important parts of myself I knew that I could trust. And that's all I really needed to know. I mean, you know, it's this whole life journey is a bit of a trust developing exercise, but I knew fundamentally, like, my core principles and my word I could trust. So I very much appreciated that. And then ironically, 6 days later, I just really started asking those deeper questions of like, what the hell am I doing? You know, like, what the hell am I doing? Who am I? What is this life? Like, is this sustainable? Am I running? Am I hiding? What am I doing? What am I not doing?
So would you say the beginning of your 30s was also the beginning of your journey into your inner self?
Definitely. And sometimes it takes the actions of the external to give you the motivation to want to look within. And at that stage, it was my relationship with alcohol. And I was looking, once again, I was saying, like, in Byron, like, knowing that partying on the weekend made me feel horrible, I was still doing it. And I was like, and I wasn't surfing as much and on bits and pieces. And I was just all these questions, like, this is weird. And then I often describe it as like that feeling of when you go to a party, a house party or something, and you rock up with a friend and they're driving, and then your friend kind of taps you on the shoulder at like 11. They said, oh man, I'm going to go. Do you want a lift? And you kind of look around the room and you're like, no, it still looks pretty good. Like, no, I'll stay. Thank you. I'll stay. And then it gets to like 2 a.m., 2:30, and you're like looking around the room and it's just like a burnout. The whole energy's changed. Everything's shifted. It's not the same as what it was. And then you just kind of like, oh man, now I've got to get home. Like, how am I going to get home? And as I said, like in the past, that never bothered me because the party would just keep going and I would meet somebody and you'd probably end up at another party. But it was that same feeling where alcohol was just like, oh man, it doesn't have the same buzz and it's not doing what it used to do. And I kept all that pretty silent within myself. I didn't want to talk about it too much because I didn't want to have to admit something. And because I was still having just enough fun and it was taking the edge off just enough. And I was still responsible enough. Like I wasn't drinking every day or anything like that. But I knew that when I drank, there was this ulterior motive. It was a different feeling that was happening when it was happening. So yeah, so the journey continued. I spent a month in South Africa, went up to Senegal, spent a month there surfing and just, going to reggae parties. And I met two guys from the Netherlands and we all hung out and it was so beautiful. And then I went up to Morocco and was still surfing the Atlantic winter and just cruising around Morocco, just absolutely loving the country and the markets and the landscape and the food. And yeah, it was really beautiful. So life changed very quickly. But if I look at it from where I am now and through a different lens, now that I'm outside of the jar, I guess, I would say that trip and what I was looking for was very different to any other trip that I'd been on. And strangely enough, that was the first trip that I ever went on that I had the intentions to work, because my intention was to not return to Australia as a carpenter. So there was already so many different feelings, there was different intentions, and there was different motivations. And then I just completely changed all my plans. Not that I had many plans. I was just going to go to the Canary Islands, but changed that, went to the States, cruised up and down California coast for a few months, and then ended up moving out to Kauai and lived on the island of Kauai and did that. And and like anything, right, it's kind of like that feeling of discomfort. It's there, but you keep ignoring it, or you keep suppressing it, or you keep numbing it, whatever you choose to do, all three. But it's that feeling of your shadow follows you everywhere you go. So it's kind of there. So next thing you know, I'm in paradise. Everything around me is beautiful. Built this, 5 meter by 6 meter single pitch roof, like what they call a folly in Hawaii. And then pitched the tent underneath that. And that was next to the veggie garden that was the size of a basketball court, and living off the land, 5-minute walk from a secluded private beach, and surf, and North Shore Kauai. It's literally where all the billionaires go. And so I just remember going to the surf one day and nothing was good enough. Nothing. The surf wasn't big enough. It wasn't powerful enough. It wasn't this enough. It wasn't that enough. And when you have those moments, it's kind of out of body self-awakening where you actually just hear yourself and you're just whoa, man, that is look around. If you're not happy here, then that's you. That's all you. And so it was a very powerful realization. I needed that personal wake-up call because I wasn't happy. I really wasn't. And sometimes it takes being in paradise to show you that you're not happy. Mm. And so then I contacted my friends my Dutch friends who lived in Amsterdam, and tested the waters. And I was just and I just knew in my heart, I'm man, I gotta get away from the ocean. Everything that I know is by the ocean. I know the culture. I know the surf scene. I know I'm comfortable. I know the language, to the point where I literally felt like I was having the same conversations I was having in Morocco. I literally felt I was having the same ones in Hawaii. There was no diversity. It wasn't changing. I felt like a bit of a broken record. And I was man, I've got to get out in the world. I want to sit down at a table. I want to break bread with people from all parts of the world, talking about even politics or religion, anything. I am an empty cup, and I want to fill it with just information, knowledge, wisdom, guidance, or anything, just anything that I'm anything other than what I'm getting right now. And that's what I did. I worked out that things were headed in that direction. I was going to go to Amsterdam. So I went down to a Sunday market and I laid out my 3 custom surfboards and surfboard bag and leashes and everything that comes with surfing, and just sold it all one by one. Just watched it all disappear, and it was, yeah, it was painful, but it was, I have this, I don't know, this ability, I guess, that maybe it's that resilience growing up in a way, but it's like when I make a decision, when I've been an old school kind of truth seeker. Like I don't lie. I don't resonate with something that's not the truth. And I will go searching far and wide for the truth, or what I believe to be the truth. And so as painful as it was to watch my boards disappear, I was also like, this is what has to be done. And I need this to happen. If I want to grow into the man I want to be, this has to happen. So as cathartic as it was, like bittersweet as it was empowering. And that's
that mission successful.
Yeah. And that's often, you know, if you talk to my mum, for example, like she knows, like the moment I make my mind up about something, it's like there's no point even saying anything. It's just like, oh, that's what he's going to do. And, you know, I even have a close friend back on the coast, and I told her one time as an example, like I said, oh, I'm going to do a motorbike trip to Adelaide. I'm going to take my surfboard. And then it was like a week or so later, she's like, oh, what are you up to? I'm like, yeah, I'm going on that motorbike trip. And she's like, oh, you're actually going? I said, yeah. I said, why? She's like, oh, you actually mean what you say? I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah. And so that was just a solo motorbike trip. But anyway, it's yeah, it was one of those things. And then the boards are gone, and then next thing you know, I'm in Amsterdam, and it was amazing because I was just like, I mean, I love Amsterdam. I think it's such a beautiful, gorgeous city, and I just felt green, and I felt like a tourist, and I felt excited, but I also felt cared for because my brothers over there are just like, they're such beautiful guys, and they took me under their wing and really supported me and helped me and guided me and introduced me to their friends and showed me around. So it was like, yeah, it was just one of those beautiful moments where I was just on the bike, and they were kind of like also brothers as well, you know, like we'd be riding in the bike lane, and they look like water, like going down the river, you know, just like so fluid, and they're like, you're riding too slow, catch up, why you ride so slow? I'm like, man, this is pretty hectic.
It's like, on the other side of the road for you.
Yeah, I'm on the other side of the road. I'm like, you know, this is something else, like it's beautiful, but I mean, it took me a little while, but you know, so it kind of had that real brotherly love, and I, as I said, I don't have brothers, so that was my experience. And so yeah, it wasn't long into my time in Amsterdam where I actually had a dream that I owned a barbershop, and the dream was bird's eye. I was looking down and I could see myself in the shop and one other person. I could see like the timber floors and stuff. And mind you, like I don't see much when I meditate, when I cannot visualize, like I can't. So for me, it's kind of like I have to kind of make it out. It's like encrypted. And so I woke up and I just could not stop thinking about barbershops. I couldn't stop thinking about them. I couldn't stop seeing them everywhere. Barber schools, everything. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So it, once again, very similar to like the decision to sell my surfboards and move to Amsterdam, without even professionally cutting hair or only ever have cut like my friend's hair. I was like, this is it. It's like, this is what I got to do. And so, yeah, the adventure just continued.
Amazing. Amazing. And how long did you stay in Amsterdam for?
I was there for a year.
For a year.
Yeah, so the year was amazing. I just, it was phenomenal because of the sequence of events. And then it was also challenging. It's kind of like in life when things are going good, things also come up within you. But if you don't know how to navigate them or understand them or find a kind of a calming solution within yourself to them, then it's really easy to just revert back to old patterns and things that you do, you know. So I was like,
so could you see those old patterns even though you're in a new location with a new goal, so to say, and the dream that you were chasing, and still the same patterns?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's kind of, I realized that I was almost, to my detriment, a workaholic. But then that would be disguised because if I love what I do, I don't want to stop as well. So it's kind of productive, counterproductive. But basically, like, to put it into context, was I had met up with a friend who I met in Morocco, and I was there for over a month, but we still hadn't caught up. And then we caught up, and she was like, "Oh, my brother has got a clothing line. They just renovated their shop. We should go down and check it out." We said, "Oh, cool." And we went down to the shop. They were closed. A couple of cats were in there. We cruised in, and sure enough, like, out the back was the renovation, and the renovation happened to be 2 barber chairs. So I'm like, this is crazy. Like, can you believe it? You know, and I met 2 guys there, a Dutch guy and a Kiwi guy, and we were all hitting it off, just chatting. And then I went back into the studio and I was just looking around, and the guy from New Zealand came up, and I told him about the dream. I told him about everything, and I just felt an impulse to tell him. And anyway, I did that, and he's like, "Well, actually, this is my studio. Why don't you come down, check it out, and see whether you like it, whether you want to be a barber?" And so I went down like the following week or 2 weeks later, and I got to see him, not only him in action, but the energy of the space and people coming in and out, the music. I mean, the quality, him and another barber and stylist were just like phenomenal at what they did. And I just saw like the look on people's faces, the joy, the way that like it created this like transformation, just like the symbolism, like everything about it. I was like, this is it. Like, and I was looking at him, and I was picturing myself, and I was like, I could see that. Like, you know, I can see myself in that role and position. And so he then proposed an offer and was like, well, I'll mentor you, teach you what you need for this cost, and we'll go at it like that. And so I was like, all right. But at this stage, like, I didn't have any money. And so I was like, all right, what am I going to do? So the other guy I met that first night was a videographer. So the idea came to think like, how can I give back? Like, how can we create something where everybody's benefiting? And there was a lot of homeless shelters in Amsterdam. And so it was decided that let's raise a Kickstarter to then raise the money for the mentorship. But then the mentorship and what I learned in that, I can then give back to the homeless shelters. And so it was like this cycle of what was happening. And so we put it all together. First off, I cut at the shelters for like a month. And the way that came about was I went up to one of the shelters and I was just like, knocked on the door. Dude answers like, hey, can I help? And I was like, are you guys looking for a barber? And he's like, oh. And he said, can you come back next week? And I said, yep. So I went back the following week. Mind you, as I said, I've only cut a couple of friends' hair, but I was always quite intuitive with it. And then it was setting up out the back. There's a push bike mechanic out the back in the shed. And I was set up like on a tool chest, was set up a towel on top. I've laid out a couple of these like hand-me-down tools that the mentor was giving me, set up a chair, there's a mirror. And then, you know, the first guy who rolls in is this originally kind of from Turkey, and he sits down and he's like got receding hairline, short, like very short hair here with like a rat tail. And he's like, yeah, can I get a fade either side? Can you make this part short? Can you make sure like this is a perfect square? And then my rat tail, like this is my favorite part, like don't do this. And it was like, man, it was still to this day like a very complicated haircut. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like shaking and sweating at the same time. But he was just so friendly and lovely, and we just hit it off. And I think I did 1 or 2 more haircuts, and that was it. Like I just kind of got the job as a volunteer, and so I did a couple of days there, and then I also extended out to another shelter. So within the first month, I'm now cutting at 2 homeless shelters, and I wanted to make sure before we come in and film that I built a rapport. You know, I wasn't just some dude going in, and mind you, I wasn't on social media and stuff like that really. And so I didn't want to be that guy who like just puts cameras in people's faces and makes people feel uncomfortable without people not knowing them, at the very least. And so everything was cool. I knew that the rapport had been built and it was okay. And I kind of picked the more aesthetic looking shelter that would make more sense in a Kickstarter video. We went in there, my friend helped me out, and we just shot this video, put it together. And then next thing you know, like this video is up on Kickstarter, like we're running this campaign. And we made some money and people were donating and this and that. And I was like, wow, my future was essentially hanging in the balance because I was just like, I don't know what's going to happen. And at this stage, it gets down to like the last 4 hours or something of the Kickstarter, and it wasn't complete. There was like 750 euros left. And a dear friend of mine saw that, and we go way back. We met back in Panama City when we were swapping Lonely Planets back in 2010. And he saw it and he wanted to show his gratitude. And so he like completed and paid that last little bit. So the Kickstarter was complete. We raised the money. And it was very incredibly powerful and beautiful gesture from my friend. And because of that, it then rippled out into the world, you know. And so over the next 10 months, I religiously showed up to the homeless shelters twice a week. I think I only missed maybe 1 or 2 days. And in that time, I did over 300 haircuts for the homeless. And that to me was just one of the most enriching experiences of my life, you know, and it was a very personal grassroots level and invitation into a world that I didn't really know much about, but I could certainly feel it. And I felt it when I was there, and I empathized for people, and I could see the misconceptions that people had around homelessness and how support is like the number one thing that a human needs. And if they don't have support or never had support in their life, then it's absolutely no surprise that they could end up in some tough situations. And that's what was so deeply personal about being in a position where I could give somebody a free haircut, because there was one less thing they had to worry about. I said it completely changed their level of self-worth, confidence, you know, their whole demeanor would change. And it was very powerful, and I was very grateful to be a part of that. And so it was something that, yeah, stuck with me forever and kind of showcased the work that I love to do. So I ended up, I mean, I'm telling you this story, but I've got so many stories. Like this is so long. Like my life has been insane. Like when I think about it, it's insane.
Very beautiful though, how you just, you know, let yourself be led, basically. You know, you don't go in with a huge plan or anything. You just play it by the ear and then see how it goes and make it up along the way. And that's very beautiful.
I was just like, you know, if you look, I've learned to give myself so much more credit, love, appreciation, worthiness, you know, which is, and I would absolutely say that, like, man, it's not, I haven't done all this, you know, it's not possible for me to do all this. Like but what it's taken for me to live this life is an insane amount of trust, an insane amount of like willingness to lean into the unknown. Because I've never, ever made a plan. Like I haven't, not in my life, you know. There was one time and I made a plan, and it was like a 5-year plan. I wrote it up on the whiteboard and I was like, wow. And then 2 weeks later it changed.
It didn't happen the way you
Didn't have
planned it at
anything
all.
close to it. So it's like, and I kind of guess I learned that early on, and I just knew what felt right. And that has been like my greatest North Star. But I mean, that also there's a dark side to that too. It's like when you know that something's not right. And that's the thing. That's where like my level of accountability has been quite phenomenal, because it's like, once again, ties into my value of truth. And if I know that something's not right, I can't stay there. I can't put up with it. So it's like, there was this insane, like, kind of inner mantra current running through my body that everything was going to be okay. Like, everything was going to work out. So I never had to worry. And I don't worry like the normal person. But as I said, I've been to some incredibly dark places because I had to. I just really had to. And even when I was I was volunteering in those homeless shelters, I worked out pretty quick that I wasn't far off. You know, the major difference was I had a family. Like, I had my mum and my auntie, my sister, you know, things like that. Like, I had a very close little family. And if worst ever came to worst, I mean, I'm sure they would be able to put me on a plane and get me back to Australia, and then I could go from there, you know. So, and that's such a privilege, like such a privilege, because I felt that, and I experienced that when I volunteered in the homeless shelters, and the same thing when I lived up in a remote Aboriginal community. Is life is so different for a human being when you do not have a plan B. Like, it's just when in the back of your mind. Like, as I said, I traveled far, I traveled wide, and I worked and I paid my way. But if worse came to absolute worst, as I said, I'm sure somebody in my family would help me out to get on a plane to get back. And there was at least a safety measure there. But when you don't have that, it's a different experience. It's a very different experience. And so that's why I value support and so much. And that's why I empathize for people who don't have that, and who grew up in unstable environments and never received that nurture, and think, or not just think, but actually are doing it on their own or alone, you know, because it can be make or break. And so when I was looking at the clients I would be with in the shelter and bits and pieces, and I mean, mind you, I'm living off, like, my budget was like €10 a day. And my drinking at this stage was, like I said, was becoming like just uncomfortable. So I was far from drinking every day at all, but I was just recognizing a few things, and it's like, oh, this is not good. And then, yeah, I mean, there's so many.
It's a long story.
So many avenues to go down.
It's like what you want to share of it, right? It's more that question, because in the end, we've started that your 30s were more like a introspective type of years, right? Maybe you would like to share just one favorite part of it, or what was making the biggest difference for you to lead you to where you are now.
Yeah, that makes more sense. And for anybody listening, I mean, I just wrote a book, and that makes it makes so much more sense, because for me, trying to explain my story in this format, even like the last time I did a podcast, no joke, it went for 3 hours. It went for over 3 hours, and that was still just flying over. It wasn't really going in. So I just want to give the context to that. It's not that I don't want to share my story. I'm so grateful for my story, but it's so hard to know where to go and what part to go into, and
we try to keep it digestible.
Yeah, exactly. We're trying to keep it fun in the way of just, like, as I said, when you're a person who deeply values experience, like, man, I've had so many that I just, as I said, where do I start? So Yeah, I'll do a quick recap in the way that Amsterdam really opened me up and opened my heart, but it also showed me a lot that I needed to be seen. Then there was also so much within myself that it was unprocessed and undealt with, and I just didn't know where to start, where to turn, and how it looked. And I ultimately grew up with a fear of alcohol, but I was conflicted because it was like the feeling that alcohol gave me. It quietened my mind. I was an overthinker, and I was when you hypervigilant, overthinker, empath, people pleaser, it's like there's a lot going on. So when you have a couple or a million beers, it's just like, wow, this is great. It's like,
Well, especially if you don't know all that vocabulary around it, you find that out later.
yeah, exactly. So then you kind of like, yeah, you try to navigate something. I've said it once before. I know that it's like somebody's giving me a plan to build a house, and I know it needs to be built, but I've got no tools. Like, how do I build a house with no tools? I was like, I know that my mental health is struggling. I know that something's not right, but I have no idea where to start. And so I went back to Australia, and I was just like, man, I've got to go. I need help. I need the safety, security of my family, and I need to understand why I'm doing certain things and why did my life go from so much adventure and love and beautiful chaos to now this. I felt like I was imploding. And so I started seeing professionals. One in particular in the beginning was like a kind of life coach, I guess, in a way, but not like in the traditional sense. But straight away was talking about like pattern recognition and what was happening and what's what and bits and pieces. And so once again, being an inquisitive, curious person, I was all in. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm starting to read books, the right books, things are resonating. Next thing you know, I'm connecting with the right path, still feeling very dark, but like the right bits of information have landed for me. And I felt relieved. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I stayed with mum for about 6 months and got back on my feet pretty quickly. But one of the cool parts was I ended up getting a job. She's out in the southeast, and I got a job in Footscray at a barbershop. And so it was an hour and a half each way on the train. So the whole hour and a half on the way there, I just read. I was just like, this is amazing. And I did that for 3 months, and I eventually moved there. And just to give a bit more context, when I was in Amsterdam, I ended up going up to Scotland. I spent time with my family, and I noticed that the whole drinking thing was deeper than what I had realized. And so that put things into perspective, kind of like the writing on the wall, and I saw it. And it was more all about my own accountability. I was like, oh, wait, this is a family thing too, right? Like all the men on my dad's side are like, they enjoyed a beer. It's just my dad was far more aggressive than anybody else. So when I got back to Amsterdam, I didn't drink. Like, I just stopped drinking for like 4 months. And then I drank again, and then I kind of my world got tipped upside down. So then I stopped drinking again. So I was very confused because I could easily take 4 months off and completely be unfazed. And there was, even at the time, there was alcohol in the house. I was living on a boat, actually. So there was alcohol in the fridge in the boat. And I had no temptation. So I was so confused because I'm like, what the hell's going on? And eventually I was living in Footscray, and then it kind of, it doesn't take much, but I guess that last straw does eventually break the camel's back. And I just remember the feeling afterwards, after like a big drinking session, and it was like, man, that anxiety, that shame, that guilt, and whatever. I was just like, man, this is horrible. Like, I just don't want this in my life. But I've tried for a year to try and recalibrate, and I just don't know what to do. So there was a guy who was going AA and who I was working with, and I asked the next day whether I could join, come down, have a look. So I went down there, and it was strange, man. Like, it was a Friday night, cold, Melbourne, and I'm sitting in like a church, and I'm surrounded by people of all different ages and kind of backgrounds, talking about, drinking. But it was refreshing as it was somewhat scary, because I'm like, what? It got to this point? I'm like, but I didn't feel like, and it was so contradicting, because I was like, man, I'm not at rock bottom. Like, I'm actually feeling really good. But once again, to be the man I want to be, I got to understand this relationship with alcohol deeper. And so I sat in those rooms and I went back for a month, once a week. And to put it in perspective, a lot of the content that I've researched and listened to in the AA space is like, people go to meetings multiple times a day. And I was going once a week, and that was suffice for me. So once again, I said I'd already handled so much on my own, but when I would sit in those rooms, it was just so powerful, the way that people were sharing and the openness and the vulnerability and the rawness. And I heard my story. I'm like, wow, that's similar to me too. Yeah, wow, okay. And so it really opened up my mind and my heart. And eventually I met my sponsor. A guy came up to me, he's like, have you got a sponsor? I was like, nah. And then we ended up, he's like, I did it. He'd been 18 years sober, and he was like, I worked the steps with my sponsor very quickly, and so I do it seriously. And I was like, perfect, you speak my language, let's go. So next thing you know, I'm found myself in the McDonald's car park outside of Melbourne, writing an inventory of the people I thought I hurt, and I even said to him, I was like, man, I haven't really left a trail of destruction. Like, it hasn't been that juicy, man. I was a happy-go-lucky dude, and I said, to be honest, the only people I feel that I've ever really hurt are the women that I've had in my life who I said I was available for, knowing that I probably wasn't, and I emotionally was not available in that capacity. So yeah, I wrote a list of the people I wanted to call, and I made those calls during 1 week, and it was one of the most powerful weeks of my life. Like, I often say, like, take away step number 1, which is admitting that you're powerless to something, and the next 11 steps are phenomenal for a human being. Like, they really are, because it wipes the slate clean. It's like you pull all the skeletons out of the closet, you apologize for any wrongdoings or any harm you may have caused, and then you carry on with your life. Like, everybody feels great. It's quite, and it doesn't always work out like that. Like, a lot of people don't accept people as amends. But as I was talking with my sponsor, and what I wrestled with the most was, I said, man, this is all preventative. I've seen what the destruction alcohol can do. I've seen it. I've felt it physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually from somebody else, and I don't want that. I don't want anything close to that. So I'm pulling up stumps now before it potentially gets, just before it ever goes anywhere other than this. I've had enough. So it was a really brave decision, because when you're 32 years old, Australian male, choosing to remove alcohol and give up alcohol, it's pretty isolating. It like severs a lot of social connections.
Incredible, though, that you had that foresight to be like, now or never, because it only gets harder, right?
Yeah, it was like I had this almost epiphany. I saw my life 10 years with alcohol, and I saw my life 10 years without it. And I was like, well, what's the point, man? Because even the one with 10 years with alcohol, I could tell that I was going to end up exactly where I was. So I'm like,
circle back.
Yeah, so I was like, I don't need another 10 years of potential destruction, right? Like, I was like, that's when it could get destructive, because that's when you're really fighting the demons, meaning that, like, the restlessness within you, what yourself really wants, the emotional support and nourishment that it actually needs, and it's not getting, and is getting numbed, and it's getting suppressed, and then that becomes a projection, and you're projecting your pain onto everybody else, and like, that's the destruction. Like, when you're projecting your pain onto everybody else, that's what the amends is for. That's like, you got to clean up after yourself. But I hadn't got to that stage. But I could feel myself, like I said, I could see where I was going. So, yeah, it was like, once again, I just kind of honored myself and made that decision for my future self. And in that moment, I felt like I gained like 33 years of my life, like just leveled up, which was pretty amazing. So it was quite euphoric, to be honest. And then I ended up, I worked for a few more months. And mind you, like, I still didn't even know. I was still so green to like counselling stuff. I was living in Footscray. There was an amazing like health centre there where it was like I was getting free counselling. It was amazing. But I'd like go do a counselling session and then go straight to work afterwards. And it's hard. That's tough.
It sounds intense.
It was intense. Like, you imagine like the early days of like unpacking and like I remember one time I wrote up on the board with the counsellor the things I could remember that I experienced with my father, and he was like, looked at me and he just said, like, you know that if you just wrote one of those, that would be a lot. And I was like, yeah, I guess. Because you don't think about it, right? You don't think about it as a kid. And that's why unpacking it is just like, oh, that's worse than, oh, okay. Like, that's how green I was. It was wild. But I think sometimes ignorance is bliss too,
Sometimes you need that to get through.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, your ship just sinks. It's a lot of weight to carry. So, yeah, I was in 6 months, and then I ended up moving down the coast, back down the Great Ocean Road, and then I saw a vacant shop, a beautiful space, and I was like, wow. And so, to speed up the story, it was like I ended up designing, building, and running my own barbershop down in the coastal town that I felt most connected to. That region particularly was like probably the only place I'd ever call home. And I'm running this shop, and it's a beautiful space that I put a lot of work and integrity into. And it basically became its own kind of therapy space. I had longer appointment times so men could feel comfortable. I was very good at chatting and cutting hair and holding space. And for a lot of it, I just cut alone. So it was a private space, and it was really, really powerful and really beautiful. And during that time for me, I needed to shoot roots, and I needed a stable ground so I could continue doing work on myself and continue to unpack and understand and just have that stability. And what I learned in that time is that as I said, there's so many teachings in this journey, on this path of experience, but there's only certain lessons that a human can learn when you stay in a place, and there's only certain lessons you can learn when you go. But you cannot learn those lessons in the opposite.
The other way around.
Like, you have to, and that's why they're so powerfully separate. And so I was learning all these beautiful new teachings because I stayed and wasn't going. And then at the same time, I was renovating my family home, which was like a dream. And so I was keeping very busy, but I was spending heaps of time alone, and I was sober. So I was like, you can't help it.
Makes it even more intense. Would you say that everything was amplified through soberness?
Yeah, for sure. Like everything. I was explaining this the other day in one of the men's circles that it was in a part of my share, and I said that what a lot of people might not realize is when you enter a life of sobriety, then you're basically foregoing and giving up the coping mechanism that helped you survive. So whether it's like the overthinking, whether it's like the thoughts, whether it's like the pain, discomfort, whatever it is, that all still comes up. But now that tool of coping, numbing, suppressing, whatever it was doing for you, is now no longer there. So it is painfully uncomfortable. And I mean, as an example, I ate a lot of ice cream, a lot. And it was just purely for comfort and curb my loneliness, and that's just the truth. I was just like, I don't know what else to do. And so it was just like learning to sit with yourself and learning to be like, whoa, like, man, these feels are heavy. And it's like, and I hadn't understood the mind yet and the power of the mind and the places it can go. And so it's a lot and it's slow. You know, it's like that journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step in it. And I remember one time, like, you know, I've done plant medicines and they like take you to the place and they show you what needs to be shown. And then there's Vipassanas, which is like 10-day silent meditation courses. And then the plant medicine feels like the freeway and the Vipassana feels like walking. Mm. But what I worked out is the Vipassana is like consistent and you don't go back, you just keep walking forward. So the more you do, the more meditation you do, the more you understand and connect with yourself. But the plant medicine take you there, show you what needs to be shown, and then brings you back. Like you still have to do the work.
Just gives you like a little crystal ball moment.
Yeah, it's still exactly. But that's not to be. I kind of had to learn the lesson the hard way because I kind of thought, wow, that first plant medicine ayahuasca ceremony was so powerful, so many tears, so cathartic. You're
healed.
I'm healed. I'm like, wow. I was like, and you know, it was like, I mean, you know, crying is so powerful and exhausting, but so powerful. And that was like I've had a couple of incredibly deep emotional releases like that in my life. So it definitely helps, but you've still got to sit with the part of yourself that is invoking that discomfort. Like, what's the belief system around that, you know? And then I later found out that was all attached to the shame that I was carrying around it. So it's like the pain was released because I believe so strongly in acknowledgement. Like, you have to acknowledge that something is there or has happened before you can move on. Otherwise, otherwise you're pretending it doesn't exist or didn't exist or didn't happen. Mm. And that's what accountability really is. It's just like, man, you know what? Because if something bad happened to me, you know, if that's the mindset you have, not for me, but like to me, then you're like, but if I acknowledge that it happened, then that I'm giving my power away. But it's like, it actually is the other way around, because it's like, well, if you acknowledge that something happened and you might have also been like the choices that one makes might have enabled that to happen, then it's like you kind of be like, well, okay, I can't rewrite the past, but by acknowledging that it has means I can move forward into the future more aligned with what I need to support myself with that experience that I've had emotionally. So it's like everything starts with that acknowledgement, but some things are harder to acknowledge. Mm. And sometimes when it's like when a person has been leveraging and playing the role of the victim, it's one of the biggest fears that a person has in that scenario is like, well, who am I and what's my life like if I don't play that person? Mm. And
if I give up that identity that I created.
Exactly. And the craziest part about it is like I've worked out, and I mean, I said I've sat with a lot of different thoughts and philosophies, and it's like the ego is just protecting the part of ourselves that needs to feel secure. Mm. And the reality is it's like the self versus the ego. And so the ego has been developed through conditioning, both external and like environmental, and the people within your life. And so this ego has been created, and it's created as a defense mechanism. But when one listens to the ego, it's kind of like the wolf in sheep's clothing, because really it's coming from a place of fear and insecurity, and it wants to prove things right or to create the right feeling to offer the security, but it's going about it through the wrong way. But really what the self needs is a whole different support system. And the ways in which you can reassure the self is so different to what the ego needs. But the thing is, if you can bypass the ego, meaning that like not dismiss it, but just understand that what it needs is very different to what yourself needs, and then give yourself what yourself needs, then you can also at the same time reassure the ego. See, like it's a false illusion when it comes to that. So a lot of people, when you don't want to acknowledge things because the ego defends it and be like, no, you were right. That person was wrong. So no, we don't do that. And then it's like, but if I acknowledge it, I can just move on. It's like, and then the ego's defending the part that feels insecure. So judgment is really just a reflection of a fragile ego. Because deep down, why would you need to judge somebody if you were secure within yourself? But the ego is trying to find a way to protect you by making you feel good because the ego feels insecure. So, yeah, I mean, this has just become like a quest of self, you know, and I often say like using the outside world as a reflection of what's happening internal. That's it.
That's a mirror.
It's a mirror. That's all it is, you know. So my world has changed so much. And so...
Yeah, what a story so far.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like tip of the iceberg kind of stuff. So, but yeah, so basically like I went from 12 years of external journey, like completely external, like sounds, lights, colors, everything, and cultures and experiences, to them huge paradigm shift, realizing that there was things that were standing in my own way. I was standing in my own way. My choices I was making standing in my own way, becoming the person I wanted to become. And so I cut those ties. I made those amends, and I just went into a decade of basically somewhat solitude. And I volunteered and signed up for this journey. You know, like I was like, I want to go, and I want to go deep. I want to go as far as I did externally. I want to do the same, but internal. And it wasn't to prove anything. It wasn't to be better. It was just to understand, because I was fascinated. I think that has been one of my greatest blessings too, because it's so easy to avoid doing the work. And what I used to admire, almost like romanticize, like the rebel, the outlaw, the misfit, I realized that, man, that's such an easy road to take. It's so easy, man. It's so easy just to numb yourself. It's so easy to just disconnect. It's so easy to like make excuses. So easy just to turn off. But what's not easy is to show up every day as yourself, and show up with every experience that you have and feel the emotions that come with it. Not have any escape mechanisms. Just be. And so that really radically changed my life for the better.
What a story till now. Sounds like now you've arrived in a place where you might have everything. You've opened your shop, beautiful coastal town, which, for context, it's the Great Ocean Road where people go on vacation. That's pretty incredible, I would say. And you're doing your introspective journeys. You've let go of alcohol, so you're set, or not?
Yeah, exactly. I'm all set. Yeah, I said, it was a very beautiful time to ground, to create a nice, solid awareness point. And I had some really beautiful friends there, like a very, very small group. They weren't even group, it was just individual friends that I've really valued. And it was crazy one day because I was just like, man, I feel like I've actually reached a point of retirement, but like what feels like retirement, but too early in life, you know? as I said, like I renovated the family home, which is a lot of hard work, but it was very nostalgic, and it was the best it ever looked. It was so beautiful, and I mean, it's already, as I said, it's a very gorgeous part of the world. And then I was driving my dream car. It's like a 1979 Mercedes sedan, burgundy color. And I had my Royal Enfield black motorbike, which, I mean, on the Great Ocean Road, right? So you're just like, it was amazing. I was doing the dawn rides and it was beautiful. And then I'd drive to work on the Great Ocean Road, which is stunning. And then the shop was there, and, you know, I had planter box above the mirror. So all these plants were cascading down the mirror. I had a felt Chesterfield lounge set, and I had all other indoor plants, and my grandparents' Kelvinator fridge that had patinaed, and wooden floors. There was a 100-year-old fireplace in the barbershop, and it was phenomenal. It was such a beautiful space. And places like, and, you know, I had gold leaf writing, like hand painted gold leaf writing. It was a friend over in Adelaide. And I always dreamt, I'm like, oh, we'd love to have a shop and have like gold leaf writing. And it was all there. And I was just like, wow. And I was like, man, I feel like this would be amazing when I was in my 50s or something, you know?
To put it into perspective, how old were you at that point?
35. I think 35, 36.
Definitely 35. Too early for retirement.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, to put that into perspective, like I don't even think I'll ever retire. Like, and I mean, I think I'll always be doing something for fun. You know, I mean, that is the goal. And so, but what I realized was I had created this incredible life, but I did it in a place that was once more home. And it offered the safety and security for me to do what I needed to do internally and externally. But I was in the shop one day and a friend came in and he asked, he's like, what are you doing here? And I was just like, oh, man, you know, it's a beautiful place. And he's just like, no, he's like, you're a big fish in a small pond. Like, what are you doing here? And I was just like, you know, it's crazy you say that, man. I have really felt like that. And it's really hard because when you build everything and you literally build it with your own hands, and I was riding my mum's push bike to the station to get onto a train at 32 years old, living with your mum after all this decades of traveling and like bits and pieces, like that was already a reality check. And then in less than 12 months, I built my own shop. Like I got back on my feet, got mental help, got professional help, really started changing the direction of my mental health, given up alcohol, like threw that away. And then it was like, bang, I found my spot. I had to go back on the carpentry tools for 4 months, which was uncomfortable, but it paid for the renovation of the shop. And I built it and I started my own business all within 12 months. So I was just like, and then I was working it, and it was a dream job. And I mean, ultimately what I created was an amazing job for myself, why I could do a lot of this kind of inner healing work. And then I got to a point where I was like, all right, well, I want to see what else is out there.
So where did it lead you?
Well, there was a friend's brother who organized people to like teach carpentry over in the Solomon Islands. And I linked up with him, and then there was this feeling that I had within myself. I'm like, if it's not that, then I want to go spend time in the Aboriginal community, or at least my understanding was I just want to spend time understanding Aboriginal culture more. Seems like I'm Australian, right? Like I grew up in Australia, but you don't get taught much in school. And so I had to do a particular qualification to be prepared for the Solomon Islands gig, which was good in hindsight. It was a very dry course, but I had I didn't have many friends, so I had a lot of free time on my hand outside of work. So I did this course, which most people, if they're lucky, do in 12 months. If they're very lucky, 6 months. And a lot of people don't finish it because it's so dry. And I finished it in like 3.5 months. So I kind of really dialed in. I was just like, all right. And then when I reconnected with that guy, and he said, oh, well, the job interview's not until May next year. And at this stage, it was like October. And I was just like, oh, that's too far away. And a month and a half before that, a guy had come in, and he used to work for this non-for-profit that supported young Aboriginal boys going to school. And so after our haircut, I wrote down the name of that and I just put it in the drawer. And so when I found out that the Solomon Island gig wasn't really lining up, then I went back to work, pulled out the drawer, got the name, and then I did an application and applied. Turns out that same guy who gave me that information ended up going back to that job, and he just got a director role somewhere in the Pilbara. And so they were like, oh, perfect timing, James has just applied, blah, blah, blah. And they only do in-house hiring, sorry. And so next thing you know, I'm going to like the first set of interviews. And the first set of interviews was in Ballarat, which is like from Lawn, Ballarat. It's like an hour and 40 minutes. And I rocked up there, and all these other guys had been invited to go to the interview, but I was the only one who rocked up in person. And I was like, it kind of blew my mind. I'm like, well, if you're going to an interview, why wouldn't you want to go in person? But anyway, I did, and ended up getting to the final round and ended up getting the job. And like on the application, it said, where would you like to go? Because I had academies all around Australia, and I said Arnhem Land. Like I wanted to go to Arnhem Land, and they were like, any other details? And I said, I want to go as remote as possible, because I was like, if I'm going to go spend time in an Aboriginal community, man, I want it be pretty far out, And so I ended up getting the director's role of that academy in Fitzroy Crossing. So for people listening, it's 4 and a bit hours inland of Broome, which is in the north of Western Australia. So next thing you know, I'm like, and this period is now come up to about 7 months where I've been trying to sell my shop. And I had all my stuff ready to go at the house under like the new kind of barbecue pergola area that I built, and as an addition to the house. It was all there ready to go. And I'm in the final weeks of like cutting in my shop. I've been trying to sell it. It's a very emotional process. If you've ever sold something like that, it's like people come in, they show interest, they ghost, they blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, it's quite tedious. And I said, you can easily get your hopes up. Well, I mean, I did. And then I remember I was driving back from Melbourne. I was visiting my family. And I remember saying like, universe, give me a sign if I'm meant to just walk away from the shop. And like, anyway, I didn't just see one, but I saw many signs. And I remember going to work, I think the following day, and I found the landlord. And I said, I'm leaving on this date. And he said, like, what do you mean? This shop's so beautiful. Like, you're just going to walk away from it? I said, yep. I said, I've got other things I've got to do. Like, I've just got to go. And so that happened. And then it was like 2 days before my last day, a guy came in, asked me a few questions or whatever. And I was just like, yeah, cool. Didn't think much about it. Heard it all before. And I got to the very last day I was trading. The last day I was in the shop, and he came back in. He's like, yeah, man, I'll take it. I'll buy the shop. And I was just like, wow. So it was the last day that I had that shop, and I sold it. And then next thing you know, I was flying up to Western Australia, flying over to Perth, doing an induction, going up to Broome, lived out there in Broome for 6 weeks because there'd been like a 1 in 100-year flood that hit Fitzroy. And so the roads were torched, and eventually like I got out there, and then next thing you know, I'm like, I hadn't looked up any photos. I hadn't done any research, because I was like, I just want to go there, and I want to go there green and ignorant, in the way of like, meaning that I don't know anything, so then I can ask people and then use that as a way of like meeting people and connecting. So I lived in this Aboriginal community, and I was supporting young boys going to school, and within that, it's like this mentorship, and there was after school activities, there was camps, there was, sporting events, there was all these things. And it was an incredible time to bond and connect and learn, most importantly, about the culture and the land and community, and really feel what it was like to be a part of a real community, and what I mean when I say that is like, communities not just taking the good parts and not showing up when it's hard. A real community celebrates the wins, because the joy within that is knowing that you got through the hard times together. And that's really what this community was, So it really showed me what a community is, and and more importantly, the depth in which we can show up for ourselves is the level in which we can show up for the community. So it was a very powerful experience being up there, and I just learned so much about land and culture. And, you know, I was very fortunate to be invited out onto country by elders and, you know, very, very connected men and women and children, and just to be out there on land, on country with those significant people was an honor. It was a true honor. And it was something that I'll never forget, because it just made so much sense. It was so powerful and beautiful, and spending time with Aboriginal culture and the way that, you know, shame is embedded really helped me see the shame that I was carrying within myself. It became a mirror. And the feeling of being broken was prevalent, you know, feeling like you've done something wrong when you haven't, made to believe through somebody else's pain or somebody else's projection that you are something that you're not. And that was really heartbreaking to witness, both within the culture and within myself, because it's like, wow, shame is such a heavy, silent weight that is so woven into your belief of who you are. And when a whole country has made a culture believe that they're not worthy, or they're not important, then you feel that pain, you see that pain.
Wow. Incredible. How big was that school?
I mean, they always lied about the numbers, but let's say, the easiest way to describe it was I had like 45 to 50 kids on my books, but I mean, it fluctuated, like the amount of students that came in. And then, I mean, it was so crazy and cool to see, because, like, you know, if you put, like, you know, the white Australian, Aboriginal Australian cultural values next to each other, obviously there'd be some correlations, but so much of it's just not, that just doesn't line up, because it's a whole nother culture. It's like if you go to anywhere else in the world and you'd be like, oh, they drive on the other side of the road, or they do this, or, oh yeah, marriage looks like that, and like that, you'd be like, oh, cool. But so many people don't even consider that in Australia. And it's like, man, this is a completely different cultural way of life. And so students would just come and go freely. Like, I mean, 95% of the students I work with didn't wear shoes to school, which is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it was just like, and they were so fun, so talented, so like beautiful, you know, like just such beautiful kids. They were just amazing, and they all had experienced a lot. And I said, to be a part of it and to hold that space was really powerful, because I very quickly learned that I don't have to do anything, you know, I just have to show up and be a positive male role model. I'm not here to save the day. I'm not here to do anything. I'm just like, because I would always remember what it was like growing up as a young male, and like all the little things, you know, like if you go in your cousin's car and like you get to listen to the music, but you get to listen to it louder than what you would in your parents' car, or you're like, you know, some kind of like art, or some kind of like you go to the skate park, or you go do something, like you feel that kind of, you know, freedom from when you get to spend time with people who aren't your parents, you know, and who get it and understand. So all the little things I just overlooked, but I also made sure that they understood that I wasn't going to talk much, but when I spoke, I had something to say. So please just listen. And we just all respected each other, and we got along great. You know, I saw the teachers spend so much energy that unnecessarily and become basically white noise, because they just like, you know, it's like when you hear something like, get your feet off the couch, get your feet, all that kind of
record.
Yeah, and no kid listens to that.
Yeah. And
then eventually they end up losing their mind, you know. And so I was just like, well, don't, and up there it's called humbug. It's like, don't humbug somebody, you know, or don't stop humbugging me, like. And so I just wouldn't humbug them. But when I had something to say, because it was important, they would listen. So it was great.
Incredible. Would you say those kids have taught you more than some life lessons?
yeah, it shows the true power of and level of resilience a child can have. Because once again, like we refer back in a way of like ignorance. It's like you don't know what you don't know, and there's not really that many children who have like this huge understanding of the world, because everything, you're kind of so self-absorbed. And I think it's a blessing. It's actually its own kind of survival technique, because if you knew too much about the world with a young mind, you wouldn't know what to do with it. It's too much. And so their ignorance there is bliss. And sometimes you don't, as I said earlier, like you don't realize the severity of something till later on. And maybe you learn when you have hopefully more opportunity and time to process it in a different way. But during it, like, I mean, there was, but also what was normal up there is not normal anywhere else in Australia or the world, I'd imagine. So I had to also get my head around that at the same time. So, but I saw a deep level of love and empathy and connection and community, one that I'd never really seen before. You know, like as an example, you know, bought a couple of drinks for the kids. We'd been out doing something like playing footy or something like that, and bought a couple of drinks. And like one of the kids, he had the drink in his hand, he was taking a sip. And then another guy, same age, came up to him and was like, and like tapped him and was like, "Can I have some?" And he like looked at the drink, and you could tell that he was stoked. You know, he was like, "Yes." And then he looked at the drink and he looked at him, and then he just went like this. Like, it wasn't like, "Oh, this is mine, go away." No, it wasn't selfish or anything. He just, and because I knew how stoked he was when I gave it to him. And so I was like, this kid is giving up something that is so precious to him so willingly to help this guy out.
And to share this experience.
Yeah, to share it. And in that moment, it was so symbolic of a culture more than anything else. And, you know, it's just like, oh, it's just a drink. But it's like it was so much more than just a drink. If you watched it unfold, if you saw how open he was to do that, and be like, yeah. And that's what a part of the culture was. It was just like, like there's no mine, it's ours. And there's pros and cons to that, sure. And these kids, they never cried. And I'm not saying that not crying is a good thing at all, but I'm just saying that, like, there was just, it's a whole different way of processing and depth, and that's what I mean. Like, it's the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to learn. There's so much you could understand. But yeah, I mean, as I said, there's two sides to every coin, right? But they shared so much. They cared so much. They supported each other. And they've gone through a lot. They've gone through a hell of a lot.
So beautiful. You mentioned going out to country, camping, making fires. This question is maybe a bit selfish because it's more like my own interest, but what is the most beautiful meal that you've had out there? What did you learn about the cuisine or just the food within Aboriginal culture?
Well, the food is the land. And the animals and the flora and fauna on the land. So, like, as an example, like, you'd stand there, not that I saw it, to be honest, but if you're standing there with a local and you're both looking out to the bush, they're seeing so much more than what I was seeing.
They see food. It's like a grocery store.
Exactly. Like, they see supplies, they see nourishment, they see all kinds of, you know, probably like the deli section, probably like, you know,
healing plants.
Yeah, the healing plants, like medicine section. There's like the dry food section. Like, that's really kind of what it was, you know. I mean, I've seen Auntie shoot a wild turkey from the passenger seat of a Land Cruiser, and like,
wow,
yeah, like 50, 60 meters away, and nail it, you know. And then, like, next thing you know, that wild turkey is now at the side of the campfire. We're like plucking the feathers. Me and like a 7-year-old 12-year-old kid, we're like plucking feathers, and then next thing you know, like that's getting butchered, then that's on the fire, and that's this, and then, you know, grandma's having some too, everybody's having some, we're making damper with that too. So you've got these like little damper hot pockets with like fresh wild turkey, and then next thing you're on barramundi fishing next day, and bits and pieces and other bits. And it wasn't like, it was very cute actually. The auntie was like, oh, this isn't just, you don't have to ask, you just help yourself. Like, don't wait for me to tell you what to do, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Because, you know, I was like, oh, please, may I have this, please? And it's like, you know, forget about that. So it was kind of really nice. And in the same breath, I was just like, thank you so much for inviting me out here. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. And so it really comes just down to respect. You know, there's respect for the land and the respect for the food off the land. And there's also respect for and the gratitude for being on the land. So everything is like this harmonious like cycle of respect. And that's why there's a freedom within it, because it's like, it's kind of like tapping into the understandings of the cycles of life and the supply chains of life and how it is. And so it's like, if there happens to be a lot of fish, then that's okay if you catch a lot, because then you also share a lot. And if you don't catch a lot of fish that day, then maybe somebody else has, and then they share that with you. So at first I was like, oh, is this wasting or wasting a resource, or is it actually taking advantage of sharing a resource for everybody? Because tomorrow they might not catch any. So yeah, once again, it's a completely different train of thought and operation and approach. Yeah. And it's like, and it's its own harmony. It has to, the funny part is that it kind of has to be experienced to be understood. And once again, like the land is so powerful like that. It's not like, you have to be on it to feel it. And that, I mean, the challenge of that too is when you work in that space, and particularly for an organisation that their headquarters is in Perth, thousands of kilometres away, calling shots for what they think is best for this small Aboriginal remote community. And so, and that's what's been happening for so long. And that's just one organisation, let alone the rest, and let alone the intentions of other organisations. So there's people calling shots for a place that they know nothing about.
Maybe you never been there even.
People, it's quite funny. I mean, you could probably imagine, it's like people would come, they'd fly, and there was an airstrip there that only small planes could fly on. Because, I mean, we're on the edge of the desert, right? There's a lot of land. And so people would come and they'd have their R.M. Williams boots on with their chinos or the slacks, and then it's like their business shirt, and then they put a high-vis vest on, and they walk around like, oh, and then you bump into them, oh, how's things? So how's it living in Fitzroy? Oh, yeah, okay. And it's just like, and they're like, oh, we got to go, you know, like they're there 2 hours. And it's like, what are you possibly going to learn in 2 hours? Crazy. So, but it's all box ticking exercises. It's all, you know, the part of the process, part of like the bureaucracy of it all. So you're kind of caught in this middle section of like, of course, I'm here to provide a supportive role, but the tools of support are implemented to then gain some kind of numeric number to represent the support that has been given, to showcase that in fact has happened. But the support that's been given is really kind of missing the mark of what is actually needed. So then you're standing there being like, or trying to convey this message back, saying that this doesn't work, or this is not working, or in fact a waste of time, money and energy, yet they're going, no, this is what needs to happen. And you're like, but they're doing it so that this number can pop out, and then they can use that money to go get more funding to kind of feed back into the machine. So you're like, so I kind of got to a point where I was just like, man, these kids are my main priority. I don't care about the rest. You know, I'll still do my job and I'll do it well, but my main focus is on the wellness and well-being of these children. And I'm going to do anything I can to make sure that happens. And as I said earlier, a lot of these kids, and I would see teachers, man, like teachers make a lot of money out there. And it used to frustrate me because some people's complacency. And I'd just be like, you've probably got a house somewhere back in Perth or wherever. You've got a family, you've got a plan B, you've got probably a lot of money in the bank, all this sort of stuff. I'm like, show up for these kids.
Because these kids don't have a plan B.
They've got no plan B. They've barely got a plan A, some of them. So I was like, come on. If you burn out, if you're exhausted, I respect it. I get it. This is one of the hardest environments to work in. Arguably, it is the toughest environment. But if you are, in fact, that, go. Because you are now bringing a negative energy to this space unnecessarily, because you're here for the money. You're here to line your own pockets, make everybody else and the kids have to suffer because of your discomfort. And at the end of the day, you'll go back to wherever with a big fat bank account and get well again. But these kids will still be here. So I was like, so you see that a lot, basically.
How was that in the sense of, did it motivate you to stay there as long as you could, to learn everything and make a positive impact? Or how did that impact your feelings of working for organizations like this?
It made me just see the truth of the reality of what was happening, basically. And I mean, look, I can't, nor do I want to, like, control those people, but I just wanted to really maintain my intention of why I was there, and that is to learn and understand and grow and connect. And I did a good job, and I felt those kids enjoyed the time that I was there, as I did. And that's all that mattered. Like, man, that place, excuse me, you get a lot of interesting people come through that place. And that's not going to stop. That's not going to stop. So, as I said, like, once again, it's like you reflect on yourself. Like, you just go, well, how am I showing up? Like, am I being true to myself? Am I being true to my word? Am I setting a good example? Like, you know, that classic thing where you see something, this is just an example, where you see like a parent, you know, swearing their head off, and then they tell their kids, don't swear. And it's just like, wow. So I was kind of like, well, am I swearing? Am I doing anything? Like, and I said I was just using it as a tool to check in, and I said, well, I've got a small window here. I mean, I was there for a year and a half, but I was like, it's a small window in time. So let's just have a good time, you know, respectfully.
Beautiful.
And then, and then I ended up moving to Broome. I mean, I didn't mention it, but so I was only there for a couple months, and then I realised that this organisation, this non-for-profit I was working for, they weren't doing any in-house training. They weren't doing any like extra facilitation when it came to like education, which is whatever. But I realised that I was going to finish up my time there, and I would have had the practical experience, but I didn't have any theoretical kind of qualifications. So, as I said before, going off the back of already doing that course or that degree, I mean, it wasn't a degree, it was just like qualification, I then enrolled to study again. And so the whole time I was there and further on, I was studying. So I was studying on every second weekend, full days, assignments and all that, plus doing all the rest camps and bits and pieces. Then I moved to Broome, and I ended up getting a job in a rehab. And so I worked as a clinical case manager in a rehab, and that was amazing. It was incredible. So I kind of like had this like cultural childhood experience, kids experience, and then I went to the rehab and I kind of got the insights of the older generational Aboriginal experience. So it was really, really profound, actually. It was really beautiful.
How was that contrast?
Well, you can kind of see what happens. You can kind of see what happens when, well, as I've mentioned before, like support and how that is. And now I just don't think that a lot of people realise like the amount of generational trauma that is embedded within that culture. It's insane. And it blows my mind that a lot of people can't see that or even acknowledge it. It's just like, wow. Because you think about something that might have happened in your life. Think about one traumatic experience and how that affected you. Just one. You know, when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that it's like the things are there. And also too, it's a system that was designed to fail. Like that's what it was. You see it as plain as day. So yeah, I mean, I'm just glad that I've got an open mind, an open heart, and I can see things for what they are. And I also don't care about the little things, like they don't bother me. So I was able to have these really powerfully connective experiences with real people. And hence, like going back to the homeless shelter days and stuff like that, I empathize with people. I don't feel sorry for people because I don't know if what you're experiencing, if it's hard and dark, I don't know if that in fact is the catalyst for your greatest change. So it could be in years to come, the greatest thing that ever happened to you. So I can't take pity on you.
Can't judge it.
I can't judge it. I just like looking at it, I just empathize and I try and put myself in your situation and go, oh yeah, wow, that makes sense. I get that.
Just be there.
And just be there and just, yeah, exactly. I think, you know, trying to, well, they say you can never judge another man until you walk the day in their shoes, you know. So it's one of those things where, and because of that, I got to learn so much more about the culture because there is so much magic. There is so much magic.
It sounds magical.
Yeah, there's so much within that culture that I say I got no idea about, don't know about, and never will know about, and that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. It's such a magical culture. There's so much woven into the thousands, tens of thousands of years of living on Australian land and living with the land. So, yeah, it's very cool. It was an amazing experience.
Wonderful. So after your experience in Broome, does that bring us to the present day?
Nah, so I finished up in Broome. I then basically realised it was a challenging year that last year. There was a lot going on, but it was kind of like felt as if it was the final push for me. You know, as I said, I saw the shame that I was carrying. It wasn't just one puzzle piece. It was a lot of puzzle pieces had gone down. So I started seeing the picture much clearer. And, you know, for anybody listening and who's either on or has been on or is still on their path of deep introspection, healing, whatever you want to call it, you know, it is absolutely not linear. Like it is like you dart over here and you learn something there, then you might go back and then you go over here and you learn something here, then that parachutes you over to this pod and then you come back and then sometimes you feel like you're back at the very beginning and then you go forward straight in a straight line and like so, but eventually feels like for me it got to a certain point where I had taken enough twists and turns and felt and experienced enough, learnt and embodied and transcended enough to then be at a place where I can go, wow, okay. And it all lined up. And of course, like was then practicing, studying to become a therapist. So everything I'm learning and what I'm learning to hold space for somebody, I'm learning for myself. So all of these processes, like everything, like I'm doing them. So there's nothing that I don't do with a client that I haven't done or has not been done on me. So yeah, you talk about like peeling back those layers and stuff and I mean, I was already versed in that. So, but there's always deeper levels to go. There's always more. That's the thing. So it kind of got really wrapped up sadly, but nicely at the end, like no hard feelings or anything like that. It was very poetic. A lot of beautiful teachings. And then I went back to Melbourne for the summer, hung out with my family, saw a bunch of friends, and then moved over to Bali. I was there for 11 months, living like an hour and a half past Canggu. Really only went there because I was facilitating a retreat, and it was kind of like the belly, in my mind, the belly of the digital nomad scene. And I kind of wanted to learn how to run an online business. But I also wanted to regulate my nervous system because it was pretty shot, to be honest. And so I reconnected with the waves and surfed, and, you know, the time in Amsterdam, that total, and afterwards total like a year and a half I was out of the ocean. Then I had another time when I was in the desert in the Kimberley, and I think I surfed 12 times in 2.5 years. So, you know, I have had significant breaks from the ocean, and in that time I've, you know, developed a yoga practice and other bits and pieces, which comes and goes. And it just allowed more space for me to be able to invite new things into my life and not be so distracted with surfing. So yeah, that 11 months was reconnecting with the ocean, starting an online business, establishing myself in that field, being a, you know, online practitioner, and then moving to Vietnam. So it's been what now, a year and a half, just over a year and a half, kind of back on the road. Didn't ever think about it. When I was in Broome, I was going to a buddy's house to get a tattoo, and I just thought, wow, I'm like, this is the first time in my life where I can I have all the tools and resources to be able to work overseas and online. And I was planning on staying in Australia, so I was like, why don't I do that? So so I didn't actually ever think that I'd be here. And so that's a really amazing experience. And to, like I said, like, I've literally just finished this book, and, you know, for anybody who's made it this far, it's been challenging to share this story only because of how much is within it. And so the book is really, like, kind of, for me, its own ritual. It has been its own ritual to put it all onto paper, to be able to look at it for what it is and actually be able to package it for myself. And then that will be a gift for the world. But it was all for myself. Like, it was all to be like, wow. And I kept journals my whole time traveling. And so I transcribed journals into this book. And now the book is like, I can just, and I feel like, I mean, life always for me feels like it's just started. And even more so now because of what I've learned, where I'm at in my life, you know, who's in my life, how I see myself, operate myself, and the work I get to do, supporting other men and other people. And so I'm so, so deeply grateful. And it's all like this, like I said, this tapestry of just experiences and seeking, searching, and looking for deeper answers. So yeah. So it's been wild. It's really hard to put into words.
But it's very beautiful once you do. So thank you for sharing your story. Is that the part of the podcast where we ask you to share your medicine of your story?
Yeah, I would say that my medicine is self. I am my own medicine. And all the answers that I've ever wanted have always been within me. And it's taken me a lifetime to realize that. But it's also, I needed the external. I needed everything else to happen the way that it happened for me to come to this deeper understanding. Because I often think, and I made up this analogy where it's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? And if I pulled a jigsaw puzzle box out right now, I tipped all the pieces on the table, and I said to you, Jess, this piece here is the most important piece. This is it. This is the final piece. Take it. And you would take that piece and you look at it and you look at the pile on the table and you go, well, it doesn't make sense. What am I meant to do with this piece? And it's not until all the pieces start going down that it starts making more sense, so that you can eventually return back to that very powerful
Take that.
and see it for what it is and understand the sense that it now makes. And a lot of the times those pieces and those messages and the philosophies within it are very simple, but just actioning them is very hard.
Mm.
So I've had to return back to myself so many times to remember, to reconnect, to remind myself, to forgive myself, show compassion, understanding, forgiveness to myself. You know, like I've had to learn to be the person that I always wanted for myself. And I used to put everybody else first. And that's why it's been such a journey. Because even in the beginning, I'm like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. I feel selfish. I'm like, feel guilty. And it's like, well, but how, if you love looking after people and supporting people, how are you meant to do it if you're not well? And so when I started putting myself first, meant I can actually then begin to give more. So my medicine has been myself. And I'm just feel incredibly blessed and privileged to have had the opportunities to have lived the life that I've lived. Because there's a lot that happens behind the scenes that a lot of people don't know. It's like traveling, right? 80% of traveling can be pretty uncomfortable. 20% when you're at the nice tropical beach and stuff like that is phenomenal. And it makes up for the 80%. But unless you know, you don't know. But that's the reality. So there's been a lot of 80%, but the 20% has most certainly made up for that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and a part of your story.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. So there you have it, an insight into parts of my story and wider perspective on life. There's one thing I didn't talk about in this conversation that I feel is important to share. Almost 2 years ago, my father took his own life. And I think about him often when I'm doing the work I'm doing with men, because I wonder what might have been different if he had somewhere to go, if he had a group of men around him where he could just be honest, if he'd known that there were actually people out there who genuinely wanted to listen. This is a part of why the work means so much to me. I don't want men to have to wait until they're at breaking point before they feel like they're actually allowed to speak. I want to normalize having these conversations earlier. So I've created a space where men can do exactly that. A circle where there's no advice giving, no problem solving, just being honest about your experiences and genuinely be heard by other men. Because telling the truth of your story is when something begins to change. I know it's hard to make that first step, but once you do, you'll never look back. So head over to @Taylor_Jardine and look for the Plum Plains Men's Circle for more information, or just send me a direct message and I'll happily share the details. My name is Taylor Jardine. This has been Your Story, Your Medicine. Thank you for taking the time to listen.